When we think of ancient Rome, what comes to mind? Towering legions, brilliant generals like Caesar and Scipio, and grand triumphs parading through the city streets. History remembers the victors. It's a story of power, conquest, and a civilization that shaped the world. The Colosseum, the aqueducts, the Roman Forum, these are the monuments to their glory. Roman history, as it's often told, is a highlight reel of military genius and engineering marvels. But every story of victory has another side, a shadow that's often left untold. For every Roman triumph, there was a devastating defeat. For every celebrated general, there was a vanquished king. And behind those kings were families, communities, and entire cultures that were shattered. Today, we're going to step into that shadow. We are going to explore the forgotten story of the daughters of the defeated, the princesses who lost everything to Rome. Imagine being born into royalty. Your father is a king, a powerful chieftain, revered by his people. Your world is one of privilege, comfort, and certainty. You are the future of your dynasty. But then, the Roman legions arrive. Your father's armies, no matter how bravely they fight, are crushed by the relentless Roman war machine. Your kingdom falls. Your home is burned. Your father is either killed in battle or captured and dragged to Rome in chains. And you, a princess. One day a prisoner, the next. Your life is no longer your own. You become a spoil of war, a symbol of Rome's absolute dominance. This wasn't just a side effect of war. It was a deliberate part of Roman psychological strategy. Parading a defeated king's daughter through the streets of Rome was a powerful message to the world. Resist, and this is the fate that awaits your children. Let's look at the story of Visnelda, a Germanic princess. She was the daughter of a chieftain, Segestus, but she was also the wife of Arminius, the man who handed Rome one of its most humiliating defeats at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. After that battle, Arminius was a hero to his people, but a traitor to Rome. Visnelda was caught in the middle. Her own father, in a political move to align with Rome, betrayed her and handed her over to the Roman general Germanicus. Visnelda, pregnant with Arminius's child, was taken to Rome. She wasn't just a captive. She was the ultimate prize. In the year 17 AD, she was forced to walk in Germanicus's triumphal parade, a public spectacle designed to celebrate his conquest of Germania. The Roman crowds would have stared, cheered, and marveled at this barbarian princess, her spirit defiant, even in chains. Her young son, Thumelicus, was born in captivity. He was raised in Ravenna and trained as a gladiator, a cruel and ironic fate for the son of Rome's greatest Germanic enemy. We don't know how his life ended, but the historian Tacitus hints it was a tragic one. Visnelda's story is a heartbreaking example of how Rome used the families of its enemies as political pawns. Then there's the case of Zenobia, the warrior queen of Palmyra. For a brilliant moment, she carved out a vast empire in the east, challenging Roman authority itself. She was educated, ambitious, and a skilled military leader. She ruled in her own right, conquering Egypt and much of Asia Minor. But her ambition flew too close to the sun. The Emperor Aurelian could not tolerate such a rival. He marched east, defeated her armies, and besieged Palmyra. Zenobia was captured. Like Visnelda, she was destined for a Roman triumph. Accounts differ on the details. Some say she was so weighed down by gold and jewels in the parade that she could barely walk. Others claim she starved herself to death before she could be publicly shamed. But the most widely accepted story is that after the triumph, Aurelian, perhaps impressed by her dignity, spared her life. He gave her Villa Antivoli, where she lived out her days as a Roman matron. Her daughters married into the Roman nobility. It seems like a merciful ending, but think about what was lost. A queen who ruled an empire became a quiet, suburban housewife. Her children, who would have inherited a kingdom, were absorbed into the very culture that had destroyed their mother's dream. It was conquest by assimilation, and we can't forget the daughters of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. After her and Mark Antony's defeat by Octavian, who would become Emperor Augustus, their children's fates were sealed. Their 3 children, the twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra VI, and the younger Ptolemy Philadelphus, were taken to Rome. They were also paraded in Octavian's triumph. meant to symbolize the final conquest of Egypt. While her brothers disappear from the historical record, likely dying from illness or by more sinister means, Cleopatra Selenia's story is unique. Augustus handed her over to be raised by his own sister, Octavia the Younger. Octavia, ironically, was the former wife of Mark Antony, Cleopatra Seleni's father. Imagine the tension in that household. Eventually, Augustus arranged a strategic marriage for her. She was married to Juba II, a Numidian prince who had also been raised in Rome as a royal hostage. Together, they were made king and queen of Mauritania, a client kingdom of Rome in North Africa. Cleopatra Selene proved to be a capable and influential ruler. She brought her Egyptian heritage to her new kingdom, promoting arts, culture, and trade. Coins minted during her reign bear her image, showing a strong woman who hadn't forgotten her Ptolemaic lineage. She was a survivor. She navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics, turned her captive status into a position of power, and built a legacy of her own. But it was a legacy built entirely within the confines of Roman power. She was a queen, but a queen by Rome's permission. These women's lives show us the different paths a defeated princess could take. Some were paraded and forgotten. Some were assimilated into the Roman elite. Others, like Cleopatra Selene, managed to carve out a new existence from the ashes of their old one. Their experiences were deeply personal, filled with loss, humiliation, and the constant struggle for survival. But they were also intensely political. For Rome, these women were more than just trophies. Marrying a captive princess to a Roman senator or a loyal client, king was a way to legitimize Roman rule in a conquered province. Their children, half Roman and half native, would serve as a bridge between the conquerors and the conquered, helping to pacify the region and integrate it into the empire. It was a long-term strategy of cultural and political absorption. The bloodline of a once-proud enemy dynasty was now flowing through Roman veins, its power neutralized and repurposed for the empire's benefit. The stories of the Snelda Zenobia's daughters and Cleopatra Selene are just a few glimpses into this hidden aspect of Roman conquest. For every name we know, there are countless others lost to history. Princesses from Gaul, Iberia, Britain, Dacia, all caught in the gears of the Roman Empire. Their stories weren't carved into arches or celebrated in poems. They were the silent footnotes to the grand narrative of Roman victory. By remembering them, we get a more complete, more human picture of the Roman world. We see that the foundations of the empire were not just built with stones and mortars, but also with broken treaties, shattered lives, and the stolen futures of young women whose only crime was to be born royal in a world that Rome was determined to rule. Theirs is a story of resilience in the face of overwhelming power, a quiet testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit even after everything has been taken away. Have you ever wondered what drove the Roman legions to conquer the world? Was it just for land? For gold? The answer is far more complex, and honestly, far more terrifying. For Rome, war wasn't a mere transaction of territory. It was a brutal, all-encompassing statement of dominance. It was about absolute power, not just on the battlefield, but in the minds and souls of their enemies. Think about it this way. When a Roman general marched his legions against an opposing kingdom, he wasn't just there to defeat their army. He was there to erase their identity. Conquest meant proving Roman superiority in every conceivable way militarily, of course, but also politically and socially. A true Roman victory wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about shattering the enemy's will to exist, breaking their spirits so completely that they could never rise again. This wasn't just subjugation. It was the psychological annihilation of a people. This brings us to the Roman general. These men were not simply soldiers, no matter how brilliant they were tactically. They were something more. They were politicians, showmen, and living symbols of Roman might. A general like Julius Caesar or Scipio Africanus embodied the very ideal of Roman strength and ambition. Their success was Rome's success, and their personal glory was intertwined with the destiny of the Republic, and later, the Empire. Imagine the scene after a decisive victory. The enemy's standards are captured, their leaders are in chains, and their cities are burning. The Roman general stands amidst the devastation, not just as a conqueror, but as an arbiter of fate. At that momentous word was law. He held the power of life and death over thousands. He could decide which cities to spare, which to raise, which populations to enslave, and which to grant a semblance of Roman citizenship. His authority was immense, almost godlike. Back in Rome, who would dare question him? A victorious general, returning with immense wealth, thousands of loyal soldiers, and the adoration of the public, was a political powerhouse. Senators who might have been his rivals just months before would now scramble to be his allies. His dispatches, from the front, read aloud in the forum, were not just military reports. They were carefully crafted political documents, designed to enhance his reputation and influence. He controlled the narrative. He was the hero of the story. He himself was writing a story written in the blood of his enemies. This concentration of power in one man had profound consequences. It was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it allowed for decisive action and incredible expansion. Generals with the freedom to act independently could seize opportunities and win wars that a committee of senators could never manage. They pushed the boundaries of the known world, bringing Roman law, engineering, and culture for better or worse to millions. But on the other hand, this very system planted the seeds of Rome's own destruction. What happens when a general becomes more powerful than the state he serves? What happens when his legions are more loyal to him personally than to the Senate and people of Rome? We saw the answer play out, time and time again. Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and of course, Caesar. These were men forged in the crucible of war, who then turned their power, their armies, and their ambition inward, against Rome itself. The pursuit of absolute victory abroad created individuals with absolute power, who eventually tore the Republic apart in a series of devastating civil wars. The very mechanism that built the empire was the same one that destroyed the Republic that birthed it. The Roman triumph, that grand parade through the city celebrating a general's victory, wasn't just a party. It was a display of one man's incredible power, a power that could, and often did, threaten the very foundations of Rome. Let's dig deeper into the concept of breaking the enemy's future. This is a chillingly effective way to describe Roman strategy. It wasn't enough to defeat an army in the field. Rome had to ensure that the enemy could never again pose a threat. How did they do this? One method was through sheer brutality. The destruction of Carthage is the most infamous example. After a long and bitter series of wars, Rome didn't just defeat Carthage, they systematically obliterated it. The city was leveled, its fields were supposedly sown with salt to prevent anything from growing, and its people were killed or sold into slavery. Carthage was wiped from the map, its future erased. Another, more subtle method was cultural and political assimilation. After a conquest, Rome would often establish colonies, settling Roman veterans in the newly acquired lands. These colonies acted as miniature Romes, spreading the Latin language, Roman laws, and Roman customs. Local elites were often co-opted. They were given a path to Roman citizenship, a stake in the new system. Their children would be educated in the Roman style, forgetting their old ways and embracing the identity of the conqueror. In a generation or two, the children of the conquered would see themselves as Roman. Their old identity, their old future, was gone, replaced by a Roman one. This dual approach of terror and assimilation was incredibly effective. It created a vast, multicultural empire that was nevertheless unified by a common Roman identity, or at least the aspiration to it. But it all hinged on the success of the legions and the ambition of their generals. The entire system was fueled by continuous warfare and expansion. War brought slaves who worked the fields, gold that filled the treasury, and glory that fueled political careers. Peace, in a strange way, was a threat to this system. A long period of peace meant no new wealth, no new glory, and no opportunities for ambitious men to rise. This inherent need for conflict is a dark undercurrent in Roman history. It explains the relentless, almost compulsive nature of their expansion. For Rome, standing still was moving backward. The machine had to be fed. The generals needed their wars. The politicians needed the wealth. And the people needed the grain and entertainment that Conquest provided. So when we look back at the towering figures of Roman history, we see men trapped in a system of their own making. A man like Caesar crossing the Rubicon wasn't just an act of personal ambition. It was the logical conclusion of a century of military political evolution. The Republic had created generals who were too powerful for it to control. It had glorified conquest to such a degree that the conquerors eventually turned on their own masters. The story of the Roman general is a cautionary tale. It is a story about how the pursuit of absolute security and dominance abroad can create profound insecurities and dangers at home. It shows how the tools of empire building can ultimately become the instruments of self-destruction. The same strength that projected Roman power across the Mediterranean was the same force that shattered its own political order. For Rome, war was everything. It was economics, it was politics, it was religion, and it was identity. And the Roman general was the high priest of this brutal, glorious, and ultimately self-consuming cult of war. Have you ever wondered what it was like to be a princess in ancient Rome? Forget the fairy tales, For the daughters of defeated kings, life wasn't about lavish balls or charming princes. It was a golden cage, where their very existence was a political statement. In the ancient world, a king's daughter wasn't just his child. She was the future of his dynasty. Through marriage, she could forge powerful alliances, mend broken treaties, and secure the lineage. Rome, a master of psychological warfare and long-term strategy, understood this better than anyone. When they conquered a kingdom, they didn't just take its land and gold, they took its future. And that future was embodied in the king's daughters. By controlling these young women, Rome controlled tomorrow. They weren't seen as individuals with hopes, dreams, or feelings. They became symbols. A symbol of a defeated bloodline, a symbol of broken pride. And most importantly, a symbol of Rome's absolute dominance. Their lives, their bodies, their choices, none of it was their own. They were pawns in the most ruthless game of all. The game of empire. Their stories are a chilling reminder that in the quest for power, the personal cost can be unimaginably high. These women were living monuments to their family's downfall, forced to play a role in the very empire that had destroyed their world. Let's take a closer look at what this control actually meant. For many of these royal daughters, it began with being taken to Rome. This wasn't just a change of address. It was a profound act of psychological subjugation. Imagine being torn from your home, your culture, your family, and being paraded through the streets of your enemy's capital. This was a common feature of the Roman triumph. A spectacular military parade celebrating a victorious general. A defeated king and his family, including his daughters, would be forced to walk in chains before the cheering Roman crowds. This public humiliation was the first step in stripping them of their royal identity and rebranding them as property of Rome. Once in Rome, they were often placed under the guardianship of prominent Roman families. On the surface, this might seem like a kindness, a way of integrating them into Roman society, but the reality was far more strategic. Living in a Roman household meant they were constantly under surveillance. They were taught Latin, educated in Roman customs, and dressed in Roman attire. Every aspect of their former identity was systematically erased and replaced with a Roman one. They were being groomed for a future that would serve Rome's interests, not their own. Their value was not in who they were, but in what they could become. A bargaining chip, a tool for diplomacy, a wife for a Roman ally. The ultimate expression of this control was, of course, marriage. A royal daughter's hand in marriage was one of the most valuable political assets Rome possessed. Let's say Rome conquered a fierce tribe on the frontier. The fighting could continue for years, a constant drain on resources and manpower. But what if Rome offered the new, Rome-approved tribal chief the hand of a captive princess from a neighboring, rival kingdom? Suddenly, you have a powerful new alliance. The chief gets a wife with a prestigious bloodline, legitimizing his rule, and Rome gets a loyal buffer state on its border. The princess herself. Her feelings were irrelevant. She was a piece on the geopolitical chessboard, moved to secure a strategic advantage. Consider the case of Cleopatra Selene II, the daughter of the famous Cleopatra and Mark Antony. After her parents' defeat and death, she and her brothers were taken to Rome and paraded in Octavian's triumph. But her story didn't end there. Octavian, who would become the Emperor Augustus, had a plan for her. He raised her in his own sister's household, providing her with an excellent Roman education. When she came of age, Augustus married her off to Juba II, a Numidian prince who had also been raised in Rome. Augustus then made Juba the king of Mauritania, a client kingdom in North Africa. Through this one marriage, Augustus secured a vast and strategic territory without deploying a single legion. Cleopatra Selene, a daughter of Rome's greatest enemies, became the queen of a Roman client state, her life's purpose repurposed to serve the empire that had destroyed her family. This strategy was repeated time and time again. The daughters of Parthian, Armenian, and Germanic kings were all used in this way. They were married to client kings, to Roman-friendly aristocrats in their own lands, or even to rival claimants to a throne. To intentionally sow discord and keep a region decent, their children would have Roman sympathies, ensuring that the next generation of foreign rulers would be loyal, or at least indebted, to Rome. It was a brilliant, long-term strategy for imperial control. By manipulating the wombs of their enemies' daughters, Rome could effectively breed loyalty into the very fabric of the kingdoms it sought to dominate. But what was life actually like for these women? It's a complex picture. On one hand, they often lived in immense luxury. As the wives of kings and powerful nobles, they would have had palaces, servants, and all the material comforts one could imagine. Cleopatra Silini, for example, ruled Mauritania alongside her husband Juba, and their court was a vibrant center of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman culture. They initiated massive building projects, and their capital Caesarea became a beacon of civilization. In a way, she wielded a different kind of power than the one she was born to inherit. She was no longer just an Egyptian princess, but a Roman-style queen, a cultural ambassador, and a ruler in her own right. However, we can't ignore the immense psychological toll this must have taken. These women were living in a constant state of duality. They were royal by birth, but captives by circumstance. They ruled kingdoms, but their authority was granted and could be revoked by Rome at any moment. They had to balance the heritage of their ancestors with the political realities of their present. How do you honor the memory of a father who was killed by the same empire you now serve? How do you raise your children to be proud of their lineage while also ensuring they are loyal Roman allies? It must have been an incredibly precarious and emotionally draining existence. They were perpetually outsiders. In their new homes, they were foreign queens. Their Roman ties a constant reminder of their kingdom's subordinate status. If they ever returned to Rome, they were no longer truly Roman, but exotic figures from the provinces. They were caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Their personal happiness was always secondary to their political function. Love, personal choice, freedom, these were luxuries they could not afford. Their duty was to their marriage, their position, and ultimately, to the stability of the Roman order. This story of the captive princesses reveals a crucial aspect of Roman power. It wasn't just about military might. It was about a deep, strategic understanding of human society, of tradition, and of legacy. Rome knew that you couldn't just conquer a people. You had to manage them. By co-opting the very symbols of their future, their royal daughters, Rome turned potential sources of rebellion into instruments of control. It was a subtle, insidious, and incredibly effective form of domination. These women's lives, filled with both privilege and sorrow, are a testament to the far-reaching and deeply personal nature of Roman imperialism. They were the forgotten queens, the silent architects of an empire built on the ashes of their own. Have you ever wondered what happens after the epic battles we see in movies and read about in history books? A king is defeated, his army scatters, and a new ruler takes the throne. But what about the king's family? Specifically, what happened to his daughters? It's a side of history we rarely explore, and it's far more complex and heartbreaking than you might imagine. When a kingdom fell, the fate of the royal family was almost always grim. The conquering king couldn't risk leaving any potential rivals alive. The defeated king himself was often executed, a public spectacle to cement the new regime's power. His sons, the heirs who could one day rally supporters and reclaim the throne, were seen as the greatest threat. They were systematically hunted down and eliminated. It was a brutal but effective way to sever the old bloodline and prevent future rebellions. But what about the princesses? In this whirlwind of political violence, the daughters of the fallen king often found their lives spared. You might think this was an act of mercy, a moment of compassion in a ruthless world. But the truth is much colder. Their survival wasn't a gift. It was a calculation. A princess was not spared out of kindness, but for her usefulness. She was transformed from a cherished royal into something else entirely. A Hevalio. Hostage. These young women were not thrown into a common dungeon. They were a special class of prisoner, kept under a kind of gilded house arrest. They might continue to live in a palace, perhaps even the very one they grew up in. But their reality was completely changed. Their gilded cage was designed to keep them comfortable but powerless, alive but completely under the control of their family's conqueror. Every move was watched, every word was monitored. Their survival depended on one thing: absolute obedience. Imagine the psychological torment. One day you are a princess, adored and powerful, with a future mapped out for you. The next, your father is dead, your brothers are gone, and the man responsible for it all now controls your every breath. The world you knew has vanished, replaced by a terrifying uncertainty. Your value is no longer in your heritage, but in your potential as a pawn in a political chess game. The conqueror could use these royal daughters in several strategic ways. The most common was as a bargaining chip. If remnants of the old kingdom's army or loyalist nobles were still fighting, the princess's life could be used to force their surrender. A letter, seemingly from her but dictated by her captor, might be sent to the holdouts, begging them to lay down their arms for her sake. The threat was always implicit: defy the new king, and the princess pays the price. This put loyal followers in an impossible position. Did they continue to fight for their fallen king's legacy, knowing it could doom his daughter? Or do they surrender, betraying their cause to save her life? It was a masterful stroke of psychological warfare, using the bonds of loyalty and affection to crush the last embers of resistance. Another powerful use for a captive princess was marriage. By marrying the daughter of the king he had just overthrown, a conqueror could create a powerful illusion of legitimacy. It was a political masterstroke. This union symbolically merged the old dynasty with the new. To the common people, it might look like a peaceful transition rather than a brutal conquest. It suggested continuity and stability, calming a potentially rebellious population. The marriage would also give the new king a claim, however tenuous, to the old bloodline. Any children born from this union would have the blood of both dynasties, strengthening their future claim to the throne and discouraging other potential challengers. The princess became a bridge, connecting the past to the future, but a bridge built on the ruins of her own family. Of course, this was no fairy tale romance. For the princess, it meant being married to her family's killer. It was a life sentence of sleeping next to the enemy, of bearing children for the man who destroyed her world. She had to play the part of the devoted wife, smiling at court and praising her new husband, while inwardly grappling with her grief and trauma. Any hint of defiance could be seen as treason, not just for her, but for anyone associated with her old life. She had to bury her past and her pain to survive. Think of the story of Elizabeth of York in England. After her father, King Edward IV, died, her uncle Richard III seized the throne, and her brothers, the famous princes in the Tower, disappeared, presumed murdered. When Henry Tudor defeated Richard III at the Battle of Bosworth Field, he became King Henry VII. What was his first move? He married Elizabeth. Their union created the Tudor dynasty, merging the warring houses of York and Lancaster. But for Elizabeth, it meant marrying into the system that had likely destroyed her brothers. Her personal tragedy became the foundation of a new national era. In other cases, captive princesses were sent far away, married off to foreign rulers to seal alliances. The new king could use his valuable hostage to forge connections with neighboring powers. By offering the princess's hand, he could secure a military alliance, a trade agreement, or a promise of no aggression. For the princess, this meant being shipped off to a foreign land, often with a different language, culture, and religion. She was utterly alone, a stranger in a strange court, her values solely dependent on the political alliance she represented. If that alliance faltered, her own position, and even her safety, could be in jeopardy. Survival in this environment required incredible strength and intelligence. These women had to become masters of court politics overnight. They had to learn to navigate a treacherous world of shifting allegiances and hidden dangers. They had to be observers, learning who to trust, who to fear, and how to present themselves. A wrong word, a misplaced glance, or a perceived slight could have deadly consequences. They lived with the constant threat of being disposed of. If a princess was no longer useful, if the resistance was crushed, and a political marriage wasn't needed, her life was in danger. A sudden illness or a tragic accident could easily be arranged. Her existence was conditional. She was valuable only as long as she served a purpose for her captor. Once that purpose was fulfilled or rendered obsolete, she became a liability, a living symbol of the old regime that was better off erased. So, While their brothers faced a swift, violent end, the princesses endured a slower, more psychological form of destruction. They were forced to live among their enemies, to smile while their hearts were breaking, and to be complicit in the establishment of the very power that had shattered their lives. Theirs was a story not of a quick death, but of a long, drawn-out survival against impossible odds. It's a stark reminder that in the grand Game of Thrones, human beings, especially women, were often treated as little more than pieces to be moved, sacrificed, and strategically positioned. Their personal feelings, their trauma, and their desires were irrelevant in the face of political expediency. The story of the fallen princess is a hidden narrative within the larger sagas of conquest and power. It's a tale of resilience, of the quiet strength it takes to survive when everything you've ever known is gone. It forces us to look beyond the battlefield and into the gilded cages where the real human cost of war was paid, not in blood, but in a lifetime of silent suffering and forced obedience. Next time you read about a great king being toppled, take a moment to think about his daughters. Their story is just as important, and in many ways, even more tragic. Imagine being born into a world of silk and gold, where every wish is a command and your future is a crown. You are a princess, a queen in waiting, the pride of your nation. Then, in a whirlwind of fire and steel, it all vanishes. This isn't a fairy tale gone wrong. It was the brutal reality for countless royal women in the ancient world, swept up by the relentless expansion of the Roman Republic and Empire. Today we're going to journey back in time to walk in the footsteps of these captive princesses and queens, and uncover the story of their fall from power and their fight for survival in the heart of their enemy's empire. It begins with the deafening roar of battle, the clash of swords, and the screams of the dying. For a royal daughter, this chaos marks the end of her world. Her home, a palace filled with memories, is now a smoldering ruin. Her family, the foundation of her identity, is scattered, captured, or worse. Suddenly, she is no longer a princess. She is a prize, a living symbol of her people's defeat. The hands that once held scepters are now bound. The voice that once gave orders is silenced by the harsh commands of foreign soldiers. She is taken, forced to join the long, grueling march of the Roman army. This journey is a torment in itself. Forget the royal litters and comfortable carriages of her past. Now, it's mile after agonizing mile on foot, over rough terrain, under a scorching sun or through freezing rain. She travels not as a dignitary, but as a prisoner, a piece of human loot. Around her are the legionaries, the very men who destroyed her home. Their faces are hard, their language is alien, and their presence is a constant, terrifying reminder of her new reality. Every glance is a judgment, every murmur a potential threat. She is utterly alone, an island of displaced royalty in a sea of victorious enemies. The journey could last for weeks, even months. With every step away from her homeland, the last vestiges of hope seem to fade. The familiar landscapes of her youth, mountains, rivers, and forests, she knew, are replaced by foreign terrains that feel hostile and unwelcoming. She eats when she is told, sleeps where she is told, often on the hard ground, exposed to the elements. The fine gowns she once wore are gone, replaced by simple, coarse clothing. Or perhaps even the tattered remains of her former finery, a cruel parody of her lost status. She is watched day and night by guards, her every move scrutinized. There is no privacy, no moment of peace, just the relentless, grinding reality of captivity. This physical ordeal is matched by an equally devastating psychological one. The princess is forced to witness the suffering of her own people, also captured and marched alongside her. She sees the faces of her subjects, now hollow-eyed with despair. They look to her, their former leader, their symbol of hope, but she can offer no comfort. She is as powerless as they are. This shared helplessness creates a profound sense of shame and guilt. She feels she has failed them, failed her ancestors, failed her entire nation. The weight of this collective defeat rests squarely on her shoulders, a burden far heavier than any physical chains. Finally, after a journey that feels like an eternity, the procession reaches the outskirts of the world's most powerful city, Rome. But this is not a grand arrival. For the captured royal, it means being thrown into a holding place, a prison like the Tullianum, The Tullianum wasn't just any prison. It was a dark, cold, subterranean dungeon, a place of dread reserved for Rome's most important state enemies. Here, in the damp, in the dark, she waits, and the waiting is its own form of torture. Days bleed into nights, with no distinction. The uncertainty is a poison that seeps into her mind. What will happen to her? Will she be executed? Sold into slavery? Or something far worse? Rumors and whispers filter through the prison walls, stories of past captives, of brutal executions and public humiliation. Fear becomes her constant companion, a cold presence that never leaves. She might be held in this limbo for months, her spirit slowly eroded by the darkness and the gnawing anxiety. Her royal education, her knowledge of statecraft and diplomacy, is useless here. Her identity is stripped away until only the raw, primal fear of the unknown remains. She is no longer a political figure. She is simply a human being, trapped and terrified. Then, the day comes. The day of the Roman triumph. A triumph was the greatest spectacle in Rome, a massive, citywide parade to celebrate a general's decisive military victory. It was a display of power, wealth, and dominance, and at its very core was the humiliation of the conquered. The general, riding in a golden chariot, was treated like a living god for a day, and preceding him, for all of Rome to see, were the spoils of war. Heaps of gold and silver, exotic animals from the conquered lands, and most importantly, the captives. For the royal daughter, this is the ultimate degradation. She is cleaned up, perhaps even dressed in her former royal attire, not as a sign of respect, but to make the spectacle more potent. She is being paraded as a prop, her presence meant to scream one thing to the roaring crowds. Look how powerful Rome is. We have brought a queen to her knees. She is forced to walk through the streets of Rome, along the Via Sacra, towards the Capitoline Hill. The streets are packed with hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens. They jeer, they shout insults, they throw things. They see her not as a person, but as a symbol of their own glory. Imagine the psychological torment. Every face in the crowd is a reflection of her defeat. Every cheer for the victorious general is a dagger to her heart. She walks past the great temples and monuments of Rome, structures built on the wealth plundered from nations like her own. This public shaming is a calculated act of psychological warfare, designed to break her spirit completely. She has lost her kingdom, her family, and her freedom. Now, in front of the entire world, Rome is stealing her last possession, her dignity. What happened at the end of this parade of shame? The fates of captive royals varied. For some male leaders, like Vercingetorix of the Gauls, the triumph ended at the Tullianum, where they were ritually strangled as a final sacrifice to Rome's victory. For royal women and children, the outcome was often different, but no less uncertain. Some might be granted a form of supervised freedom, a gilded cage within Roman society. This wasn't an act of mercy, but a strategic political move. A living, breathing ex-queen was a powerful symbol of Roman clemency and control. Zenobia, the powerful queen of Palmyra, is perhaps the most famous example. After her defeat, she was paraded in Aurelian's triumph, reportedly bound in golden chains. But she was not executed. Instead, she was given a villa in Tivoli, where she lived out her days as a Roman matron. Her children married into the Roman aristocracy. On the surface, it seems like a gentle fate. But think about it. She was forced to live among her conquerors, to adopt their customs, to see her children become part of the very system that destroyed her empire. Every day would be a reminder of what she had lost. Was this life a reward, or was it a subtle, lifelong punishment? Cleopatra Selene II, the daughter of the famous Cleopatra and Mark Antony, offers another perspective. After her parents' defeat and suicide, she and her brothers were taken to Rome and paraded in Octavian's triumph. Orphaned and alone, she was then raised in the household of Octavia, Octavian's own sister. Octavia was also the spurned wife of Mark Antony, Cleopatra Selene's father. Imagine the complexities of that household. She was raised by the woman her father had abandoned for her mother. Eventually, she was married off to Juba, II of Numidia, another client, king loyal to Rome. Her life became a tool of Roman foreign policy. She was given a crown again, but it was a crown on a Roman leash. She became a successful queen, but always under the shadow of Rome's power. Se survive. She even thrived, but on Rome's terms. These stories show that survival often meant assimilation. To live, these royal women had to let go of their past and embrace a Roman future. They had to navigate a complex social and political landscape where they were both celebrities and prisoners. They were exotic curiosities, admired for their former status, but always reminded of their subjugation. Their children would grow up as Romans, perhaps with little connection to the heritage their mothers fought to protect. The bloodline would continue, but the identity would be erased, absorbed into the great Roman melting pot. The journey of these captive princesses is a powerful testament to the human capacity for resilience, but it's also a stark reminder of the brutality of empire. They were women who were born to rule, who found themselves stripped of everything and forced to build new lives from the ashes of their old ones. Their stories are not just historical footnotes. They are deeply human dramas about loss, survival, and the painful compromises we make to endure. They remind us that behind the grand monuments and triumphant histories of empires, there are always hidden stories of personal tragedy and incredible strength. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the past. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden corners of history. Let us know in the comments which historical figure's story you'd like to hear next. Until next time, stay curious.